Welcome everyone. I'm Dr. Alli Feduccia, the co-founder of Psychedelic Support. And today in our speaker series, it's an honor to have Sara, Gael, and Chelsea Rose join us from the Zendo Project. And the Zendo Project has been doing some phenomenal work for a number of years now, and they've assisted over 6,000 people at festivals and other events in international locations. And they set up safe spaces and provide harm reduction information at festivals, but as well as for other professional organizations who could use this type of learnings to really keep their communities safe over time. I'm going to do a brief introduction for Sara and Chelsea, and then we'll get going with their presentations. And we left plenty of time for questions. You can drop them into the chat or save them for the end, and we can take the questions then. Okay, so Sara Gael has worked for Zendo Project since 2003. She was in the role of the director of Zendo for many years and is now the harm reduction officer. She focuses her time on providing education and consultation to organizations. And she is also a therapist on MAPS MDMA clinical trials in Boulder, Colorado. She received her master's degree in transpersonal counseling psychology at Naropa and has been integrally involved in the psychedelic movement in a number of different places as outside of Zendo. So we're really excited to have Sara here today. And Chelsea Rose is the Zendo Project and Clinical Support Officer. She has also worked with Zendo Project since 2013 and holds a master's degree in integral counseling psychology from CIIS and is a licensed marriage and family therapist. Chelsea works with DanceSafe, which is another public health organization that focuses on drug testing kits and information for individuals to stay safe. And she supervises a crisis response team in Nevada City. So with that, I'm excited to welcome both of them here. And I had the opportunity to volunteer with Zendo some years ago at some festivals. And for me, it was a very impactful experience to really see firsthand how this work unfolds in the festival setting. And really, to me, brought home the message that these services are critically important in these types of environments, as psychedelics can pose different risks depending on, outside of clinical settings. That's one profile compared to these other type of environments. So with that, let's hear from Sara and Chelsea.
Thank you, Alli. Thank you, Psychedelic Support, for having us. And I do want to clarify, I've been with MAPS since 2013, not 2003, though that would be, I guess in spirit, probably since 2003. So really happy to be here and just really appreciate all the work that Psychedelic Support is doing in the world. So happy to be sharing about the Zendo Project and MAPS's harm reduction work today. So first, I just want to begin by just presencing where I'm at, coming to you from Boulder, Colorado, which is occupied territories of the Ute, Cheyenne, and Arapaho peoples. And I just want to take also a moment to just recognize time and where we are at in history, and just this really monumental moment of tomorrow being the 19th of June, and officially now designated national holiday of Juneteenth. And I just want to invite in a moment for us all to just pause and take a breath. So for those who are here watching live, or those who might be watching this recording at another moment in time, and just a moment to ground and take a couple of breaths. And really the invitation here is, we're going to be talking about psychedelic support, community support today, and mental health. And just want to presence, the reflection of all that we have been through as a collective humanity, especially in this past year. And the intensity and the weight of the current climate that we are in, literally, and also in society. And yeah, just to note, that we've all been on a collective journey together. One of my mentors, Alex Gray, talks about this time right now as he talks about it in relation to the Graf perinatal matrices. So Stan Graf developed these perinatal matrices, which essentially looks at the process of birth. And one of the things that Alex speaks to that I really resonate with is that we are at a time of birthing a new reality right now, of birthing a new world. And I think also that this birthing of a new world can feel like a challenging psychedelic experience, and definitely had many moments over the past year where it has definitely felt like a challenging psychedelic trip that we are all on. So I just want to speak to that, and just sending everyone listening to this just compassion and love. So I'm going to speak first to just a little bit of mission and vision of the Zendo Project for those who might be less familiar. So one thing that some people may know and may not be aware of, so the Zendo Project is actually part of MAPS, the Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies. And it is a program that was developed by MAPS in 2012. And we provide professional comprehensive harm reduction education and support for communities to help inform and transform difficult psychedelic experiences into opportunities for learning and growth. And part of our vision is that we envision a world where communities are educated, resourced, and engaged in applying harm reduction principles to support individuals exploring psychedelic states, recognizing that challenging experiences can be opportunities for self-exploration and healing. And the tagline that we've adopted over the years that you'll see on our materials is to be co-creating, creating communities of compassionate care. So really, during this time, in this past year of COVID, as we have not been going to festivals because the majority of the work that the Zendo Project has done has been at festivals, we have been really going inward as a program and really looking at how can we take what we have been learning at these festivals over the years in terms of the tools, the techniques, as well as the ways in which we've learned to meet people where they're at, to bring presence and compassion to challenging psychedelic experiences. And this is going to be this conversation today. Zendo Project does do trainings. We have longer trainings, but this conversation today, just to give everyone a sense of kind of what the history of Zendo Project as well as where we are today. And Chelsea's going to be talking a little bit also about the approach that we take. So the vast majority of people who take psychedelics do so outside of a clinical, therapeutic, or ceremonial environment. And at MAPS, we really believe that it's important to provide education and support for people who choose to use psychedelics in what is commonly referred to as a recreational environment. And I just want to be clear that when I say recreational environment, what I'm meaning is really anything that is outside of a clinical or ceremonial or research or therapeutic context. And so that could mean it at home, in nature, at festivals and events, and with friends in related environments. As many of us may be aware, in psychedelic use, as far as we can tell during the pandemic, even though people weren't going to festivals and events, that psychedelic use was still, in fact, continued to grow and rise during the pandemic. And maybe more people using at home. And I feel like it's just important to speak to where we're at in the psychedelic movement and history of psychedelics and this current renaissance that we are currently in. And really, I want to name that because I think that it's going to be increasingly important for harm reduction and peer support models to be brought out into the world and out into society as more and more people explore the potential benefits of psychedelics, and whether that's in a therapeutic or in a recreational setting. And every year, really millions of people use psychedelics outside of any supervised setting, and many of them, and increasingly more, for the first time. So we really believe that as we explore the vast potential benefits of psychedelics, really MAPS is focused on the benefits and focused on, and specifically, MDMA-assisted therapy for post-traumatic stress disorder. We really believe that at MAPS and at the Zendo Project that it's also really important for us to adequately understand and mitigate the risk. So what we've been doing over the years is a sort of a two-pronged approach, and one is providing direct service at festivals, and the other, as Alli mentioned, is providing education and training, both to the public as well as to specific sectors of professional sectors such as mental health professionals and first responders. So psychedelic harm reduction really includes a variety of methods to help prevent and transform challenging experiences while in a non-ordinary state of consciousness. And I just want to speak that this work we really feel is relevant to also experiences where people may not actively be on a psychedelic. But I mean, I would argue at this point, we're all kind of in a non-ordinary state of consciousness right now on our planet. And so really the tools that we've used in the Zendo Project, which Chelsea will be speaking more about, I think are really applicable not just to people who are on psychedelics and not just in event and festival settings, but they're also really applicable outside of those settings and to a variety of psychological and emotional challenges. And one of the model that we use is a peer support model. And I think one of the really amazing things about this model that I've really appreciated about it over the years is that it is a community model that brings together both people who have a background in mental health as well as laypersons and those who come from a variety of different backgrounds, and really teaches people some really basic attending skills and ways to work with someone who is in a psychedelic crisis. So also, I just wanted to speak that, the importance of psychedelic harm reduction for the movement of psychedelics itself. So I really think that psychedelic research and the exploration of its therapeutic potential during the mid 20th century, so like that, the last 1960s LSD, that huge movement where we were really looking at the potential benefits of psychedelics in psychology and in the mental health system. I think that actually that moment in time was likely disrupted and impacted in no small way by the inability of the psychedelic movement itself to effectively address and navigate adverse psychedelic experiences. So, as we'll be talking about today, the vast majority of people who take psychedelics have a positive, or I don't really say neutral. It's kind of hard to take psychedelics and have a neutral experience. But, I think that it's a little bit of a paradox, because really the vast majority of people who take psychedelics do have a positive experience. And on the other side of things, what we really want to do in the Zendo Project is also like normalize difficult experiences, and that challenging experiences are also par for the course. And if you're in a setting such as a clinical or ceremonial environment, that is really understood and even welcomed as part of the healing process. But I think something gets lost in translation when we bring that that theory over to the recreational environments. So in a therapeutic setting, really someone might be going to heal, and in that process, whether it's MDMA-assisted psychotherapy for PTSD or going down taking ayahuasca in a ceremonial setting, part of the understanding of that experience is that it's going to bring up challenges for people to work through. And I think that in recreational environments, that may not always be the case because of the set and setting. People aren't often planning on going. Some people are, but not everyone is planning on going to a festival to, say, work through, open up their childhood trauma and work through it. However, what we see is that when people take psychedelics, because they are non-specific amplifiers and because they help us see aspects of ourselves which have been denied, suppressed, or rejected, that it is common for those things to come up. So it's kind of like on one hand, really challenging, especially like really big crisis experiences, kind of like when we think about the ones where people might end up in a situation where they're restrained or sedated. Those experiences are much less common. However, it is common during a psychedelic journey for at least part of that experience to bring up challenge. And so the work that we've done over the years, we really have worked with that full spectrum of people, everyone from someone who's having a challenging time, but might be more inward and might be really just internally experiencing some emotional or psychological difficulty, all the way to the more escalated situations. And in the more escalated situations, a lot of what we do is we teach de-escalation tools and techniques to our volunteers to help de-escalate those situations. And I think that what we've seen over the years, as Alli was speaking to, we've assisted over 6,000 guests. And I think that what we've seen, and it's hard to track numbers, but anecdotally, I think that a lot of situations that we've helped people through to de-escalate, those are situations which possibly could have ended up in a situation where someone was restrained or sedated, and we were able to de-escalate the situation and support the individual. And so, just believe that it's really important that we do better this time around, kind of harking back to what I mentioned in the 60s, that to provide adequate education, information, and tools to help society deal with the complex psychological and emotional territory of the psychedelic experience. There's a lot there. And I think we need help, and we can need help navigating that. And in a hyper individualized society, in a society where we're used to often trying to take care of things on our own or pulling ourselves up by our bootstraps, or where community support or reaching out for support from others is not necessarily the norm or the MO. I think that it's a pretty radical revolutionary act, and Chelsea will be speaking more about community support and the community model. And the last thing that I just want to speak to before I hand it over to Chelsea is to give you guys a little bit of a window of what we've been developing and sort of gestating during this more time of internal not going to festivals. And one of the things that I'm really excited about that is unfolding here in Denver, which I'm Boulder, so close to Denver, is that it's an example of how we're taking what we've learned and are bringing it out into society. So in 2019, Denver decriminalized psilocybin mushrooms, the city and county of Denver, for the purpose of personal use. And during that time, the mayor actually appointed a panel, and that panel reports to the mayor and helps to provide recommendations around policies and suggestions to inform the integration of psilocybin into the culture and into society. Because one of the things that we saw here, specifically in Colorado, is that with the passing of cannabis, there was definitely an uptick of first responder situations, especially with cannabis tourism, where a lot of more people were coming and having challenging experiences. Because I don't know about y'all, but cannabis can be one of the most challenging experiences if we take too much, or it could just be very intense. So as part of that panel, I joined that panel as a representative back in 2020. And so that panel's actually been working with MAPS to develop a comprehensive psychedelic and psilocybin response training for the City of Denver first responder personnel. And that includes law enforcement, which includes the Denver Police Department and Sheriff's Department, as well as in Denver, we have a wonderful mental health co-response unit, which is, you see a lot of those popping up right now as there's more of a push and focus on police reform and defunding. There's really a focus on, okay, how can we bring in more mental health professionals to support these behavioral issues? And so we will be also training mental health co-responders, as well as local emergency medical services and paramedics, who are often the first to arrive at a behavioral health incident and things that involve psychedelics. So I'll end with that. I just think that's been really one of the really exciting things that we've been up to. We're hoping to implement this training in Denver to over 4,000 first responders, and for that to be a model that can be taken to other cities, specifically cities and states that have decriminalized, but also as more and more cities and states decriminalize, to be able to take that out there. So that's my piece for right now. And obviously we will have a Q&A at the end, but I'm going to pass it over to my dear friend and colleague, Chelsea Rose.
Thanks, Sara. Thanks, Alli, for having us here. It's a pleasure to be here and see so many people in participation. Yeah, my name's Chelsea Rose, and I'm calling in today from Missoula, Montana, where I grew up. Indigenous land of the Blackfoot, Salish, Flathead, and many, many other tribes as well. But I live in Grass Valley, California, which is a land of the Yuba River watershed and home to the Nisenan tribes. So I just want to start with talking about what our approach is and the approach that we have developed in our time with the Zendo Project. And so really the question being, how can we as peers and as clinicians and even as friends, depending on the circumstance in which you might find yourself supporting somebody, how can we really help someone who is seeking support with a psychedelic experience? And, you know, as therapists, this is often the water that we swim in, right? It's a offering of receptivity and compassion, and really holding an open mind and an open heart to what somebody's experiencing, and also non-judgmental. And the reason that I think that in some ways that seems obvious, right? Like I said, it's the water that we often swim in, but you know, there's a lot of stigmatization around drug use, and that really is part of our society, and it's also just within us. So it's something to be mindful of when we're in those spaces. And I think additionally, you know, we can feel a lot of stigma toward ourselves for going through a difficult time. You know, we really want to be seen as being able to handle things or wanting things to be easy. And that might have even been our intention, you know, in taking the psychedelic, was that we were wanting to have an enjoyable time. And so, you know, I think when we can show up and really hold that space for whatever's coming, even if it's difficult, it really allows somebody to dig in and really get past that. And maybe even at times there's a fear of being in trouble, right? Because these substances aren't legal. And so that can be there. And so there's a lot of pieces. And like Sara said, the trauma can arise that people have been through, and concerns and worries, and when those experiences are amplified, they can feel really big and overwhelming. And so as a support person, coming with that openness is an important component, and just watching ourselves and allowing ourselves to be open to what somebody's experiencing. And I would say in that same vein, it's important as a person and as a sitter to be self-aware and authentic and honest. So I always think of that as being attuned to where I might have blind spots or have an agenda, and really try and hold that awareness and set aside any agenda that I might have. In the Zendo, we lean on concepts that we have called they're like the 4 pillars, the Zendo's 4 harm reduction principles. And Alli, if you want to, they are on our website if you want to put that link in there. And the real foundational principle to me is just setting that foundation of safety for somebody. And so that can include a lot of different things, but a few that I'll mention here is confidentiality. Holding someone's experience in confidentiality can really allow more space for their experience to arise. Kindness, right? Respect and kindness. Simple things like a comforting area to be a comforting space. Unconditional positive regard, and also just important to stay within your scope, which means that you want to really provide something you feel capable of doing. And if something feels out of your scope, that's a good point at which to reach out for help, or potentially ask for a higher level of care. Psychedelic experiences can be opportunities for learning and growth. And I do think that's a lot of the reason that people really dive into these experiences. And I think even more so, they can be learning opportunities when those experiences are difficult, because it's in our most difficult experiences, right, that we really dig in and ask ourselves questions about what's happening for ourselves. And so that's another pillar of the Zendo, is that difficult experiences are those opportunities for learning and growth, and we can lean into them and possibly find an opportunity in that. Another would be that we want to allow someone's experience to be the lead in how we're navigating our support. So we're really letting their inner intelligence guide our support through their experience. And that really just means listening, taking the time to listen, being curious, and giving the space for their own experience and their own inner wisdom to be the guide. And take the water. I wanted to touch on the topic of shame, because this feels like a really big piece. Shame is at the root of so much suffering that we have as individuals and also as a society. And, and also shame for having a hard time, like I mentioned earlier. And, in that shadow place, we often don't want to be seen as having faults, but this can all come up in the psychedelic space. And I think often when we avoid that feeling of shame, it can prevent healing, right? Because we don't even want to look. It's just too painful. And so as a sitter, we can really welcome that with curiosity and really hold that loving kindness. And I think being seen in those places can be really healing when given that warmth and care. So, there's some questions we could ask. There's many questions we could ask to somebody who's having a difficult experience, or we can kind of hold the questions even within ourselves, like, what's in this experience for you? What's here? Or we can have the curiosity of just learning and wanting to learn more about their experience and asking them to tell us more about what's happening. The body shows so much in a psychedelic experience. So noticing what's happening in the body, is there a need for movement? What are the sensations that are going on, and what are those sensations showing? So that somatic approach. And sometimes it's as simple as not really doing anything at all and just being there. And I really like that, because sometimes I think as a Western culture, we just really have this drive to want to do something, right? We want to help. We want to make things better. We want to fix something. But sometimes sitting with someone in a psychedelic state can just really be a great opportunity to just be. And there's something really relieving in that, right? We don't actually need to do anything. We can just be there with them and be a presence. And sometimes that presence, our permission of being present, gives them more permission to be present with what's arising. And we can welcome the myriad of emotions that might arise in that space. So I'm going to skip over into integration, because integration has been a really popular topic around psychedelics at this time. And so we'll take a quick look at integration, make sure we get time for our Q&A. So integration comes from the root word integrare, which means to make whole and to bring together all the different parts of ourselves into this wholeness. And so I just want to take a few minutes with you all, and you feel free to close your eyes if you feel comfortable. Put your hands, one hand on your heart and one hand on your belly, and just notice how this body that's beneath our hands it's made up of so many parts, right? So many physical parts, and also so many experiences, so many things that we've been through in our lives. And we're just holding all of that inside this one being, our experiences and even the environment outside of us and what's around us. So you can just notice the sensations of your body, the space that you're in, what's happened this morning, what's happening now here in this webinar. And even as you notice your breath, you're breathing in the environment around you, and that environment is feeding you air. And as you breathe out, you're breathing out yourself and into the world, putting yourself into the world. And so you can really recognize that a lot of what happens in integration, as we come back and and kind of notice that all of this that's around us creates this one dynamic experience of being an individual, in my case being myself, Chelsea, but for each of you. And noticing that effort of moving toward wholeness, it really, a lot of it happens effortlessly. So as we come back, and open your eyes, feel free to open your eyes. And we can think about how, even today we were integrating, we probably had breakfast. So these are the things that we do every day, right? We drink water, we relate to other people, we're resting. And then there's the integration that can happen intentionally. And that's the integration I really want to focus on around psychedelics, right? It's the integration that we intentionally make space for. And just one thing to keep in mind as we talk about integration is that I think a lot of times we expect integration to be a linear process, right? We start here, we started a psychedelic experience, and then we integrate this experience into who we are in a linear way. But actually, really, integration is an ongoing and unfolding process, and it can ebb and flow. Like Sara talked about non-specific amplifiers, psychedelics really amplify our human experience. And in a lot of ways, that can encourage us to have a deeper understanding of who we are and how we relate to ourselves, how we relate to our relationships in the world around us, and how we relate to, the universe at large and our belief systems. And sometimes questions that might percolate from that place might be big questions, really big questions like, who am I? And what is my purpose? And what's arising in this experience out of my unconscious? And what parts of myself are longing to be known and seen? And so that's really the purpose of integration, is that we are allowing our experience to show us things and make meaning out of those. And so if anybody feels inclined, I welcome you to, write into the chat what you imagine the purpose of integration might be, and that you've heard that integration can support with, or that you've had in your own experiences. And I'll list a few here as well. The first one, of course, is the one that I mentioned, meaning making. And that's really big, because it's really the meaning that we make out of our lives that can really give our lives purpose. Another thing is the exploration of self and your experience, right? It's just an exploration. It's a curiosity and a following of an unfolding. Often a psychedelic experience can connect us to something beyond even our psychedelic experience, right? So understanding that connection and integrating that connection into our greater understanding of ourselves and the world around us. And the integration process can really deepen, right? The psychedelic experience isn't necessarily over when the substance is no longer working, right? And we can use that time afterward to really deepen and ground those insights into our lives. I'm just looking at some of the contributions to the chat here. It's definitely healing. It can help heal trauma in our body, help trauma move through our bodies. Yet we can tune into nature. I love that one so much. I love to be in the outdoors. Understanding different parts of ourselves that we may not have realized were there. Those are all really, really great ideas. And there's many methods to get there, right? And I hesitate to say, oh, there's one specific, there's these certain things that you should do, right? Because there's so many different ways to get there. And that's the beautiful thing. It's unique for every person. And so a few different activities, it could be a physical activities like being in the outdoors. It could be a reflection activities like journaling or meditating. It could be a sharing activity like talking to somebody, right? And that's what we do with peer support, is we use that method of being able to share and connect to deepen our experience. It could be a self-care activity, maybe taking a bath, or even eating a really good meal. And there's just no one right way, right? So it's really just about making the time and space and having the intentionality that you want to take the psychedelic experience beyond the moment and into your life in a deeper way. And so to wrap up, I'm just going to touch on the community, because this is all tied back to community, and just want to highlight the importance of community in our mental health, right? And how mental health is really impacted by a lack of community. And I think we've all had opportunity to see how that's true over this last year during COVID, when we're all social distancing and staying home more than usual. And, I noticed the phrase psychedelic community. I noticed that phrase gets said a lot. And, I really think that's because psychedelics can bring people together, and they often do bring people together. And, that's peer support really leans on that. Peer support, it provides an opportunity for connection in a community context, and it allows us to support one another, right? We kind of always say that our pie in the sky dream for Zendo would be that everybody learns these skills. And in learning these skills, we wouldn't even need to have a Zendo, because we'd be able to take care of one another. So it's that community piece that just really feels valuable. And, healing and growth is not a solitary activity. Of course, it has its solitary aspects, right? It's our own experience that we're in only in ourselves. And there are times where it's great to be in solitude, but there's also an enormous piece of our lives that's about belonging and about being among others. And so, being witnessed and seen by friends and loved ones, or even just a one compassionate person, when handled well, can be a really great opportunity to rewrite our stories. And, there's something really magical about being seen in our messiness and still being loved. I think that can be an immensely healing experience. And ultimately, we have to come back to relating. We might go into a deep individual experience in a psychedelic state, but there's always a point at which we're going to come back to our relationships, in which we're going to lean on our relationships. And as we shift our internal world, right, we're also going to shift and be impacting our external relationships. So I just want to highlight that importance of community. And, people often ask, how do I connect with community? How do I connect with the psychedelic community? And I'll add a few resources in the chat, but there are peer support groups and psychedelic societies and harm reduction projects, including the Zendo, and there's the new Fireside Project. And so getting involved in those ways can really help folks to reach out into the community and connect. So that's all I have for now. And we're wanting to give some space for Q&A. If people have, I don't know if people have been placing their questions in the chat. It's a little bit hard to track, Alli. I don't know if you've caught things there, but I'm happy to jump in and answer questions with Sara.
Awesome. Wonderful presentation. Yes, audience members, please drop your questions in the chat and we'll get those answered. And while we're doing that, I have a question that comes up for people is, what to do if you're with a friend, or maybe you're at a festival and someone is having a difficult time. What are some ways to support a friend in those moments, and maybe some ways to identify even that somebody might be struggling?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Alli. So I think one thing, people have been reaching out to us a lot over the past year, asking when we're going to be starting up our trainings again. So before COVID, we were doing full day-long trainings, mostly really not online, but in person. It's in major cities across the US specifically. And so just to name that, we have been on a hiatus and pause, but we will start resuming our full training shortly, probably in the late summer to early fall. So, if you're interested in, thank you for putting that link, Roxanne. If you're interested in signing up for Zendo trainings, the best way to do that is to sign up for our newsletter, which you can do on our website. And then from that newsletter, get some announcements around when those trainings will be. And I think, Chelsea, I think you did a great job speaking to kind of like the foundations of the work in terms of those principles. And I think that the principles can often talk about, a way of being and a way of showing up in presence and unconditional acceptance and non-judgment and non-pathologizing. And I think that one of the things that I'll speak to, which I think that a lot of our tools or techniques or approaches is rooted in, is regulating our own nervous system. because I think that when someone is, especially if someone's in a state of fear, or somebody is in a state of panic, they're having a challenging time, they're feeling lost or disoriented, really one of the best things that we can do is to find a place of grounded centeredness within ourselves. And it's not about being like this, perfectly meditative place, but really it's about just acknowledging what is coming up for ourselves in the moment when we're faced with someone. Because whether we're a therapist or we're providing peer support, or it's just really difficult sometimes to be faced with the pain and the struggle and the suffering of another being. And so one of the things that we really teach our volunteers is really focusing first on regulating your own system so that you can be coming from a place of more grounded and authentic connection as well. And also accepting that you're human, and if you are feeling dysregulated, or you are feeling like whatever the person is coming with or presenting with is triggering some of your own stuff, to just really acknowledge and honor that. So it's not about pushing aside what is going on for you or what's coming up, but just really like being authentic with yourself and honest with yourself first, and doing what you need to do to work with your own fear or confusion or anything that might be coming up, and also to get support from others. So those are some ideas. The Zendo Project manual, which I think Alli did post there, can also be found on our website. We do have an older version. We have a new version that's on our website. Has some really good, just like solid points for things to do in the moment.
Yeah, thanks, Sara. Yeah, I think sometimes it's as simple as just letting somebody know you're there with them, and like I said, in that piece of just being, it can be quite simple to be there for somebody, right? We can reflect. I think reflecting is a great tool to use, and just being with somebody and letting them know that you're there and that you care can really go a long ways.
Great, thank you for answering that question. And I'm going to circle back to Stuart, but there's a related one with, can you speak to the feelings that come up after the experience and linger, that feel difficult or are not processed fully? And is there such a thing as a fragmenting of the mind? And this is Rachel's question.
Yeah. Thanks, Rachel. This is that piece where I would say the integration can be so supportive. I think it is common that people have experiences that linger and that actually can go on for much longer than you think. I was recently reflecting with a friend that I am still integrating an experience that happened nearly 10 years ago. And so, it can even be that extended of a time period where there's still understanding coming to light. And so I think sometimes really having someone to support you with integration is a great step. And Alli has an absolutely wonderful resource for this on her website. She's got a referral list of psychedelic integration therapists who offer this. And I think you can search by location. Really always appreciate leaning on that resource. Thanks, Alli. And Sara, do you want to share anything about the splitting aspect?
Yeah. The question brings up for me like the polarities of integration and disintegration. Like when we think about disintegration, not always just even the human, but just in like the natural world, right? The kind of the unraveling or the falling apart versus the wholing or the integrating and coming in. And I really do I really do personally believe that we can experience some very intense traumas, some very intense things in our lives, including challenging psychedelic experiences, but that we do, and this is a lot of what we teach in the MDMA PTSD therapy, that we all have an inner healer, an inner wisdom, an inner guide. And having worked a lot with people with trauma of varying sorts, varying kinds, whether that's childhood trauma, adult trauma, complex PTSD, I think a lot of what we're experiencing as a planet right now is also transgenerational trauma. And then there's also racial trauma in many different forms. And I think that having worked with that, and yeah, Ed, I'm going to mute Ed, that I do think, I really do believe that that inner healer, that inner guide never goes away, and that it's a part of ourselves that actually stays with us. And, you know, some might say even, you know, even beyond this life. And that's for everyone's own personal schema and how they see the world. But I think that we can experience some really intense things and come back into wholeness and come back into integration. And I think that it takes support, and that might be, you know, I think this is a good place. Chelsea, you talked about scope, right? There's a scope of care that's needed. So, you know, in the mental health system right now, which is a really disintegrated, broken system in and of itself, which I think psychedelics hold a lot of promise for helping to transform that system. But I also think that peer support does as well. So I think for a situation where someone might be experiencing an acute, challenging situation, peer support might be a really great resource for them. But for someone who's experiencing more prolonged challenge or disintegration after an experience, that's a situation where it's like you then might want to seek that therapeutic professional help, right? So I think that there's like a scope of care. And I know for Chelsea and I, one of our visions, you know, that we share moving forward is that the peer support model, not just psychedelic peer support, but peer support itself will help to fill in a lot of the gaps of the accessibility of mental health treatment in our society, and the places where people who often need support the most are not receiving that. So accessibility and inclusion. And I think that peer support really is part of that conversation, because there's many people who can be helped with peer support. And then there's situations that are really best treated with mental health support. And I think that that question points to that is a situation where someone would really potentially benefit from the support of a therapist who has those skills. It's not just, you know, there's a specific skill set around working with psychedelics. And yeah, just a second, the list that psychedelic support has put together as an amazing resource for that.
Thanks, Sara. You know, there's a question here about underground ayahuasca ceremonies. And this steward is wondering, you know, how prepared are these groups for the worst case scenarios? And, you know, have they been trained in how to handle these situations? And, you know, that's a really, you know, it's really unknown what goes on in a lot of underground situations. So doing your research when you go to international retreats or different types of environments to really have an idea of how the facilitators are going to be, how they've been trained, how they hold space, how to really be prepared. And we compiled a list of these type of questions that you can ask ceremony facilitators in a free harm reduction course that we've put together. So I'll drop that link in the chat. And so, you know, we're in a brave new world where we don't have these certifying bodies necessarily. And that's, you know, with this gray area of legality or decrim, we're really having to rely a lot on community and trust and really trying to do the best we can to keep people safe and have the right information on hand. So with that, I'm just going to move to the next question. Let's see here. So this question says, as several helping professionals come to give support, what safe and responsible framework do you see for training integration coaches? And this is helping professionals outside of medical frameworks.
Yeah, I can speak a little to this, Chelsea, and then maybe if you've got something to add as well. I just want to, I think that it's really important to first name that integration work as a specialized area of the psychedelic field. I think that the people who reach out for integration support are coming, like that spectrum that I spoke about, they're coming from many different experiences. And having provided integration support and therapy in the past, I no longer have a private practice right now, but in the past I've provided a lot of integration support. And some of the people who I've worked with that are really people who are on that more extreme end of the spectrum. And so I name that because I think that, you know, as we're navigating this like Wild West, unregulated realm of like who's practicing what and who's doing what in different trainings and what's available and certifications. A couple things that I just want to note is that if you or someone you know are interested in providing integration support for others, just to be aware that the people who might reach out for integration support are often people who are in acute crisis. So I think that, you know, some of my integration clients that I've worked with have been the ones who are experiencing the biggest challenges. And so I think it's really important to name that because sometimes I think I've seen people get involved in integration work and not really be prepared for how intense those situations can be with people. You know, part of why people find integration work oftentimes is because they're in an acute crisis and they don't know where to go. So, you know, there are a lot more programs coming out there providing integration training. I'm not going to name any specific one. You know, people feel free to put things in the chat. But I just want to speak to that as like an overall arching comment on integration work is that it can be really, it can be crisis work. Yeah. Chelsea, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, I mean, I think I can just briefly add, you know, by saying that a lot of this, a lot of these resources are really being developed right now. Because this psychedelic renaissance, if you will, is really taking off, and a lot of programs are being developed, and a lot of understandings really are still being developed around the impact of psychedelics and the need for people to have support before and after. And I think the other piece I would add is that if someone decides that they're going to take a psychedelic, they're going to go on a psychedelic journey, you know, the integration piece it really starts right then, right? It's not necessarily just this aftercare piece. It's also the whole experience. So it could include your intention. It could include harm reduction practices and what you're going to do to help yourself. It can include a backup plan if you need support. And so I think, you know, we can kind of look at it as this big frame, this whole experience that could unfold and need support. And, you know, and again, I really advocate as a community to really share resources on harm reduction and, you know, how people can, if they're deciding to enter into one of these experiences, what are the tools that they can use that they know will support them in a beneficial outcome, because I believe that's really what people come to psychedelics looking for often, is a beneficial outcome, whether that's in a recreational setting or in a clinical setting. And so just spreading education and knowledge about all of these skills and all of these practices and sharing resources and being ambassadors for one another, I think is a good starting point.
Yes, absolutely. And in this fast-paced field, we're going to have so much new information coming forth. And I really appreciate the different perspectives people bring from their trainings or life experience. It's a lot of varied perspectives that really give a more holistic sort of ways of working or understanding psychedelics. So I'm going to go to this next question from Roxanne, who is on our team here at Psychedelic Support. And so she's asking, can you speak to providing support as a harm reductionist or clinician that is sensitive to bias, deeper level of stigmas, and possible prosecution of BIPOC festival goers and clients?
Yeah.
Thanks, Roxanne, for that question. So I think the first thing I would name is trauma-informed approach. And I think that we hear that term trauma-informed approach, but to take it a level deeper and further, a racial trauma-informed approach. There are a number of teachers out there. Resma Menachem is one that I'll name. His book is My Grandmother's Hands, and he's a somatically trained therapist who really wrote this book specifically to focus on the way he frames it is white bodies Black bodies, and then police bodies, both white and Black police bodies. And I really love his approach. Gabor Mate is another one, and some of you have been mentioning in the chat as well. But I think Resmaa really speaks to that, the piece of racial trauma. So I think it's really important. And we're seeing this more in, thankfully, still not enough, but more and more in psychedelic trainings, and a more culturally competent, culturally informed approach. And I also think it's really important to name, we talk a lot about set and setting. We didn't talk about that today. But I think that one thing that gets left out of set and setting very frequently is the mindset of individuals from a variety of different personal identities. So the mindset that someone is experiencing in a psychedelic state from a person of color perspective experience, or somebody who, same with things like sexual orientation or gender, traditionally marginalized people are experiencing already, because of the experience of trauma, the disproportionate trauma that those people's experience, that trauma shows up in a different way for them as well. So really being informed that set is not just, it is mental health, it is what's been going on in your life, it is exposure to negative stimuli, but it also is personal identity. And just to be aware, as you develop your competencies, whether it's as a professional capacity or in peer support, just to continue to get education and training around how trauma and transgenerational and racial trauma impact different bodies in different ways. And I think that, to tie that, I know we just got a couple minutes left, but yeah, definitely to tie that into, festival work and decriminalization, and just really important that in the generation of the policies that we're initiating, and as we work on a policy level, that we're always including the voices of BIPOC communities, as well as ensuring that, as well as LGBTQ communities, other marginalized communities, and ensuring that those voices are at the table in the implementation of policy change, as well as the voices of people who use drugs. And that includes, today we talked specifically around psychedelics, but I think it's really important to not take a psychedelic elitist approach in the way that we're working at both harm reduction as well as drug policy. And that's not something that we really named here today, but we're here talking specifically about this little niche of psychedelic support and harm reduction. And harm reduction is a huge field that encompasses all drugs. And I think that it's really important that as we do harm reduction work, we're also focused on the decriminalization and eventual legalization of all substances, because that's ultimately what is going to be, the huge piece that starts to actually change the way that that people are treated, and treated by law enforcement and others in society. So thank you.
Thanks, Sarah.
Hey, thanks so much, Sara. And I know Sara has another meeting coming up right here at the hour. So I want to go ahead and just thank you both for all this information, for taking the time to come and speak with us on these critical topics. And as the psychedelic renaissance lifts off even further, this open conversations around safety and sharing of resources and building this together in community is so important. So all the work you all are doing is critically necessary, and I'm really looking forward to sharing your trainings and your events as they become available again, and also seeing you at the Zendo Project at festivals again. And I think you still are, this is still open to volunteers at the festivals. They have people apply, and you can actually go and sit with people and be part of the offerings that they have there on site. So you can find out more at the Zendo Project.